Get ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast welcomes Jennifer Strickland, a TEDx speaker, a former model, founder of You Are More Ministries, and author of the new book, I Am a Woman, Taking Back Our Name. Jennifer Strickland, thank you for joining us on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
You know, this has been a conversation in America that I never thought we'd have to have, which is the topic of defining a woman. And when you say and state in the title of the book, I am a woman, there may be some people scratching their heads. So let's start there. How do we define a woman?
Well, we have to go back to the beginning. My personal belief is that the deconstruction of the word woman in our society has been, honestly, a thought reform movement. People have been taught to believe that if you don't say a male can be female, there's something wrong with you. And you're right. We never would have imagined that the world could not define the word woman. So my theory is we have to go back to Genesis. We have to look at God's first words about woman and start there.
Yeah, it's not difficult, but you talk about the thought reform, and I'm thinking about the attacks on language that I hear, and I have a terrestrial radio show, and I sometimes hear in our news department, instead of saying a pregnant woman, they'll say a pregnant person or a birthing person. We're all pretty confused, at least some of us are.
Unfortunately, people who do not use this new language are labeled as unsupportive or dangerous or not caring about trans people or homophobic. All of these labels that are placed on people, it's kind of like George Orwell's 1984. And I don't know if anyone remembers reading that book in high school or college, but in the book, there's this city called Oceana. If you do not use this new language, okay, that's invented by the quote-unquote oppressors, you're punished, canceled, demoralized, and labeled as bad. And that's kind of what's happened in our culture because nobody even knew what gender identity was a few years ago. Nobody had ever even heard the word non-binary or believed that, men should be in women's prisons just 10 years ago. So it's a new language, there's new rules. And the question is, are we going to play by those rules or are we going to stand firmly on the definitions of male and female that have been in place since the dawn of time? Because if we all cave, this will become the new language of our grandchildren. The dictionaries have changed the meaning of male and female, man and woman. Dictionaries are online now. They're not in print the way they were when we grew up. They're changeable and they're malleable. And when the dictionary changes the meaning of male and female and says it comes down to a feeling, if I feel like I'm a man, I am one. Or if I feel like I'm a woman, I can participate in women's sports. I can walk into women's bathrooms. When the dictionary changes that definition, we need to really stop and think how we are going to take a stand for the next generation. Are we going to cave? Or are we going to fight back? That's really the question of the hour.
This all falls apart, and it's kind of a failure of logic. If I feel like a doctor or I feel like a police officer, am I immediately granted those authorities? If I feel like a child and I'm 60 years old, can I go into an elementary school and sit in the classroom? Why is this getting a pass only in this one or these few areas as opposed to broadly in society?
That's a great question. I think that it will become more broad, but the entire goal sadly, a lot of it was rooted in the feminist movement. We could talk a little bit about that,
Yes.
But the entire goal was the deconstruction of the family and the annihilation of gender. The feminist movement, at its very, very root, didn't honor men. It said if women raise themselves up as superior to men, we would find ourselves. It placed the responsibility for the human family on the shoulders of women. Well, in God's economy, ultimately, the man is ultimately responsible to speak on behalf of the family. But the feminists took the man's mantle as the head and said, I'm responsible for the life and death of our children. And so there was this whole deconstruction of gender roles, right? They wanted to break out of this ball and chain of being a wife and mom, apparently. Say that we're equal, that there's no differences between men and women. And it's just not true. There are many differences. I mean, men are twice as strong as we are in the upper body. They can punch twice as hard as we can. There are differences between men and women, and there is good reason why we have single-sex spaces. But the feminists are not especially the radical feminists, are not defending single-sex spaces like girls' bathrooms and girls' locker rooms and girls' sports. That's because at the root of their movement was the annihilation of gender, the denial that we're different. But we are different. Women bring life. Women are life givers. We have the unique capability to bring new life into the world. We are different than men for good reason, and our differences are beautiful and they are purposeful. And by the way, men's strength, physical strength, they're to protect us. They lay down their lives in war to protect us, and that should be honored as well.
You talk, Jennifer, about the feminist movement. I think of the 1960s. I think of a song title that's very similar to your book title, I Am Woman, by Helen Reddy. Hear Me Roar. I think of Billie Jean King versus Bobby Riggs in the tennis match and all the societal changes. There was a lot of chaos there. But was there any legitimacy to that movement? Were there people who were sincerely looking out for women?
Oh, 100%. 100%. There were. Obviously, the women's right to vote was, obviously necessary. But the other thing that the feminists were standing up for was female genital mutilation, as found in Africa and China. I mean, those women, those feminists were saying this is damaging. I mean, the idea that there was female genital mutilation was like a ritual practice. I think there was like over 200 million women and girls who went through that. I mean, there was the numbers are really high. Don't quote me on that. I know the numbers are in my book. There was a massive movement to annihilate that practice from the world to protect the mental health of these girls. Obviously, most of the women in the feminist movement had the right ideas, but at its root, it was corrosive because it did not uphold men, and it did not uphold the sanctity of life of children in the womb.
I'm so glad you brought up FGM, female genital mutilation, because it was until quite recently, maybe within the last 5 years, we heard a lot about it, as you referenced. And now those voices have become silent. In fact, they've become advocates for mutilating female genitals in these various surgeries. So how did this flip happen when this was such an evil and now it's being celebrated just with a different name?
It goes back to the changing of the language regarding sex reassignment surgeries. People wanted, and Helen Joyce, let me just say this, Helen Joyce in her book Trans explains this better than I can, the entire history of the trans movement. It's essential reading for anyone who wants to really understand how this has changed. So they hijacked the word gender because it didn't fit with their sex reassignment agenda. When they would say people can have sex change operations, well, you can't really change a person's biological sex. So they took this word gender, which used to refer to masculine and feminine pronouns and so forth in language, La belladonna, is a feminine gender in the language. Beautiful woman in Italian. These are gendered languages. English is a non-gendered language. Okay, this is deep, but it's also kind of simple. They tried to neutralize the English language because we are a non-gendered language. Spanish, the Latin languages, Hebrew, Greek, all of them are feminine. Every word is almost every word is feminine or masculine. So you can't take gender out of those languages. So gender used to refer to language or someone's biological sex, but they pulled that word gender out and they began to teach that people can have a gender identity separate from their biological sex. That teaching, which I call gender ideology, literally infiltrated from colleges to kindergarten classrooms, from the government all the way down to the kindergarten classroom. This idea that children can choose their gender began to infect the culture. And it is so permeated the feminist movement that they can't back off from it now. So feminism has pretty much collapsed. Now, let me just say, there are a lot of women who call themselves, who believe that are feminists, that call themselves feminists, who have departed from the trans movement and are saying, wait a minute, we never marched for this. We never marched for girls to now be mutilated, as you said. I mean, it's serious. Gender affirming care is a process by which girls cannot become boys, but they're told that they can. And they use drugs and life-altering surgeries to make that happen. And the girls end up infertile, which is what happened with female genital mutilation. These girls end up infertile. And boys as well. They have sexual dysfunction for life because of these drugs. It is a complicated and difficult path when you try to remove gender from the language. And it's a very confusing doctrine for children to base their identities on.
The Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast. Our guest is Jennifer Strickland. The book is I Am a Woman, Taking Back Our Name. We continue in a moment.
Join the revolution. Online at shillingshow.com.
ShillingShowMedia.com is your one-stop shop for websites, audio and video production, and photography.
ShillingShowMedia.com will take your project from conception to completion.
ShillingShowMedia.com is reasonably priced and highly professional.
Need a website for your business? Visit ShillingShowMedia.com.
Need a video created or edited? Visit ShillingShowMedia.com.
Have a photography or graphic design project? Visit ShillingShowMedia.com.
ShillingShowMedia.com is your one-stop shop for websites, audio and video production, and photography.
Visit ShillingShowMedia.com. That's ShillingShowMedia.com.
Schilling Show Unleashed.
We continue now with Jennifer Strickland, author of the new book, I Am a Woman, Taking Back Our Name. I'd like to talk about and you cover this in the book, the Nasty Woman movement and the Women's March immediately upon Trump's election or his inauguration. But what was the genesis of this movement? What were they calling for?
Well, it was the single largest march in U.S. history. Okay, that alone calls for our attention to be on it. The single largest march in U.S. history happened right after Trump's inauguration, and it was called the Women's March. Pro-life women were not invited, by the way, to the Women's March, which pro-life women make up for over half of women in the United States. So, pregnancy centers, any Christian women's group that believes that life in the womb is precious, were not invited. So it was primarily a movement of the left, but there was women from all races, ages, and backgrounds at the Women's March. They were angry about Trump's inauguration, and Ashley Judd got up. She's a Hollywood actress. She got up and started reading this poem that was written by a 19-year-old girl. The poem was called I Am a Nasty Woman. It went on and on about misogyny and white supremacy and homophobia, and used a lot of degrading language about women. And she spoke it over the crowd. And I think we underestimate the power of women's voices to shape a nation. I was mortified because I teach identity to girls. Okay, I have a ministry where I teach girls that they are loved, they are precious, they are chosen, they are lights to this world, they have influence, that no matter who they are influencers, that they are powerful, they can be courageous, that they're noble, not nasty. That experience of watching those marches on TV is what really inspired my book, because I wanted to speak the truth about what's positive about being a woman. And unfortunately, girls are now getting their definition of womanhood from the left, from pornography, from feminist mantras that say sex work is work and we're to smash the patriarchy. So there's all these confusing messages about what it is to be a woman for girls. And I want to right the tide. I want to speak up as a Christian woman, as a woman in ministry who has spent over 25 years teaching healthy identity for women and girls, and say, this is not who we are. We are not nasty. We are noble. We're not angry. We are able. We can speak with love on our lips and grace in our hearts, and we can uphold men and respect the womb and respect children. And we can be the guardians of the home and the shepherds of the children. And we don't have to be nasty in the way that we do it.
You talk about in a section of the book about being made in God's image. And it's hard sometimes for people to relate to this, and maybe particularly for women. But what does it mean to be made in God's image?
Such a great question. It really means to reflect his heart in the world, to walk in humility and in love and respect for our fellow man, to be a life giver. Specifically, the word woman in God's language means one who brings life. And that means not just in name, but in our actions. God is a verb in the Bible. Like, it's different than English. His language is action oriented. So the action of being a woman is being life giving. We bring life with our words, with our actions, with our bodies, souls, and spirits. Not only that is the female body created to bring life into the world, but her voice was created to bring life. Her actions are to bring life. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's what it means to be a woman in God's language. It's to be a life giver. Right now, we have an opportunity to redefine the word woman for a generation who is a pornographic culture that is very confused about what it really means to be a life giver, to be a woman.
You mentioned in the book specifically Pornhub, white teenage girls, and this impact of pornography, particularly on that demographic. Would you expand on that? Because I'd never heard these numbers before.
Yeah. Well, the highest search term on Pornhub is teen girls. A very high percentage of them are white teen girls. And it's very interesting that it is white teen girls is the highest demographic of girls rejecting femininity, rejecting their gender and wishing to be men. So these numbers of girls that are rejecting their gender right now have grown by like over 4,000%. All of a sudden, we have all these girls that don't want to be women. We need to ask ourselves why. Why are they rejecting their gender? What is it about being female that feels demeaning to them, that feels like they lack power, they lack worth? Well, kids see pornographic images these days usually by the age of 11. And in growing numbers, girls are becoming addicted to pornography. That number rises every year. When they see these images of girls being choked, asphyxiated, demeaned, and demoralized, they don't want to be women. I would have been terrified, by the way, terrified if I had seen images like that at that age. Even today, I refuse to see images like that. I will not. I mean, our boys in our family, our daughters, our family, we are very serious about this. That is the opposite of what a woman is. The opposite. These girls are receiving very confusing messages about womanhood, and as a result, they are rejecting their gender. Let me just say this really quick. It is also an issue that the church has to look at, because a lot of churches silence women and do not honor women as equals. And little girls growing up in these churches, or little girls growing up and watching their mothers be abused, they start to see womanhood as weak, silenced, demoralized, and not as valuable, not as powerful as a man. And so they don't want to be like their weak, subservient mothers, or the silenced women that many churches have, that don't, churches that don't recognize abuse and things like that. Domestic violence is not addressed very well in the Christian space. It's not just the feminists, but it's also the patriarchy. Like, both men and women have to look at, where did we go wrong in upholding and valuing women the way that God intends?
You have a section, Jennifer, toward the end of the book about practical ways to take back the name woman. And I'd like to talk about a few of those, because these are so positive, and I don't want our time to get by without mentioning. You talk about mentoring. What does that look like, and how do you find a mentee?
Well, there are younger girls all around us. If someone is younger than you, you can mentor her. I mean, you don't need a mentoring program. If you are an older woman, there are younger women all around you that need you to model healthy femininity for them. Healthy femininity that respects and honors men in the way that you talk to men, in the way that you treat men. More is caught than taught. Girls are going to mimic the behavior of the older women. So if older women are modeling this idea that our entire value is based on your breast implant, well, the younger girls are going to believe you. To be a mentor, you have to yourself get right and model healthy femininity that breathes life, that brings life, that honors life, that respects life. When you do that, and you cook with your daughters, or teach them to make a chocolate pie, or teach them to make spaghetti, or get them in the kitchen, get them away from their phones, take walks with them. Mentoring is easy and natural, and it should be happening everywhere right now, because these girls really need it.
You also mentioned something really interesting, and I think often overlooked in today's society, which is prioritizing home. Really exactly the opposite of what happened during the feminist movement in the 60s, in which home was put aside. So tell women how they can prioritize home best. We
are the life and the light in the home. We are the guardians of the home. And that's if you want to know a biblical understanding of women. Home is our post to guard. Even if you don't believe the Bible, the bottom line is we all know that the women set the tone in the home. We create order from chaos. That's what mothers do. And when our primary energies are outside the home, or home is a painful place to be, children will not flourish. And so women have to prioritize, no matter what their passions are. And I'm a working woman myself. No matter what our passions are, we have to prioritize the home as the place where the human heart is formed. That's what Debbie Titus, my mentor, used to always teach. She's with the Lord now, but the home is where the human heart is formed. It is the place where children's identities are formed. So we can't be absent from the home. We have to be super present and guard the influences that are coming in and out of the home.
Finally, Jennifer, you talk a lot about waking up to government control, and this one is so key, and yet a lot of people are asleep to it. So what do you mean by that, and how do we do that?
We don't have to obey our government if it brings harm to the children. We don't have to do that. If a teacher is being told she has to use masculine pronouns to refer to a girl, she can say no. If a coach is being told that they have to allow boys in girls' locker rooms, she can say no. This is a Rosa Parks moment for men and women. You know, Rosa Parks was famous for, being the black female who stood up in the back of the bus and said, and sat in the front of the bus and said, I'm not going to sit in the back of the bus. Because of her movement, because of people like Martin Luther King, right? Blacks have equal rights today. Okay, right now is the moment. Where are the Martin Luther Kings? Where are the Rosa Parks? Where are the men and women who are going to stand up and say, we're not going to have books in our kindergartner classrooms and our elementary schools that teach girls that they can stop their puberty to become boys. We're not going to lie to kids. People are doing that. Riley Gaines is one of them. She's the swimmer who had to compete against a male, and she has stood up and said no. And they're suing the NCAA for it. It's time for the people to stand up and use their voice. This is an essential moment in human history, and we all have to do it.
There's so much wisdom in the book. Jennifer Strickland, if people would like to get a copy of I Am a Woman, or if they'd like to explore your other online activities, tell us how they can do that, please.
Right now, you can go to Amazon.com to order the book, I Am a Woman, Taking Back Our Name by Jennifer Strickland. And hopefully we'll give everybody the link for that. And you can go to my website, youaremore.org. That's the letter U, the letter R, MORE.org, or IamAwoman.us to find out more about the book.
You've done a fantastic job in making the case, Jennifer, and it's such an important book. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I've really appreciated the time that you took and the questions that you asked me, because this really is an important conversation right now.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at schillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time.